And so I think what happens with climate change is that, you know how we sometimes talk about being the elephant in the room? I mean, we can kind of say it's the elephant, we're sort of inside. We're sort of inside the elephant. We're locked inside, we can't see out because it's totally part of our lives. And so what we do, and I think this is what happens with conservatives in particular, is we drop in our own enemies into it, the existing ones which fit with our worldview. I spent a lovely day with the Texan Tea Party in Texas. And it was a lovely day. They're very friendly, generous people. I was quite upfront about what I thought, and they love a fight. I mean, but like a friendly banter. Maybe not entirely friendly. I mean, the lady who was hosting me was Deborah Medina, and this is a photo for which she advertised her gubernatorial campaign to be the Republican candidate for governor of Texas. The gun, I asked Deborah, I said, "The gun, do you really have a gun the whole time?" She said, "Yeah, sure I do. I have it here." And she's got it like right down the side of her car seat. I go, "Wow." I said, "What's that for?" She says, "Well, you never know when you might need it." I'm thinking, okay, that's good, because bearing in mind that I run a climate change education charity and I used to work for Greenpeace, and I'm just going to go and speak to these people, just kind of wondering quite where this line about when you might need this thing comes. But very, very nice people, very friendly. They hate climate change. They hate everything about it because it is a means to remove the freedoms, their constitutional freedoms and their rights, and it is an attempt to extend the power of government in every way. The enemy? It's kind of people like me, to be honest. And I understand why that's happened. Climate change is a narrative without an enemy. The enemy gets dropped in, and in the absence of their own narrative, the Tea Party does not have, or in fact, the Conservatives as a whole, do not have an adequately strong and compelling narrative of climate change based around their concerns of property, of freedom, if you look up, by the way, if you Google climate change plus freedom, you won't find anything. The only real stuff out there is people saying climate change takes freedom away. So in other words, all of the language of what speaks to their values is about how climate change is an opponent to it, believing it as an opponent rather than actually that it's something that they should be resisting in its own right. Climate change and property, all of these things. But I have to say, we environmentalists are very liable to do the same thing as well. Always going around and creating our own enemies, according in our own image and dropping them in. And I understand why. And I have to say, big oil, I don't love big oil. I think Rupert Murdoch behavior of Fox is absolutely, well, maybe not Rupert Murdoch, but I think Fox is appalling for the misinformation it puts out. But I also have to say that we're doing the same process. It's a missing enemy that we're trying to just keep dropping in. I had an extraordinary conversation with Shell Oil, which I'll just tell you quickly in 1 minute. I went in there and they had a big video showing behind the reception when I went in, saying Shell takes goal zero, this thing, very, very seriously. Goal zero. We here in Shell, we insist on safe behavior. No accident is acceptable. Don't run down the corridors, they said, which is something I haven't heard since I was at school. Don't run down the corridors, they said. Report any unsafe behavior by your host. Have a very safe visit. This is in Shell headquarters, right? Well, this in itself is a bit strange. I'm kind of just standing there just watching this video. And the people behind reception, they start pointing at me in this somewhat creepy way. And they go, sir, like this, sir. Okay. They go, sir, your shoelace, sir. Your shoelace, sir. You could trip and have an accident. I go, okay. I like to live dangerously. They've got me pegged by now. I'm a threat to goal zero. So not surprisingly, as I start to head up the circular stairs. Fortunately, I didn't remember that actually my last visit to Shell headquarters, I'd been chained inside the revolving doors. But on the way up to the main meeting room where I was due to meet David Hone, their chief climate change guy, they're doing this again. They're going, sir. And all the security guards are doing it too. They go, sir, hold the handrail, sir. Hold the handrail. You might slip and have an accident. And as I look up all along the handrail, it says, hold the handrail, hold the handrail, hold the handrail. It says, dangerous, slippery steps. Anyway, go. Finally, when I sit down with David Hone, I say, I sit down, he starts doing this whole weird thing again. I'm sitting down opposite him across the conference table. He goes, George? 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 Your pen, George, your pen, it's leaking, George. It could leak and have an accident. You could damage your clothes. I was going, well, I don't think you're really in a very strong position to talk about things leaking and having an accident. Which is really the point. The point is that this is, and this is why I'm talking about, this is why narratives are so important and enemies and all of this, because very smart people in entire institutions, in governments, in companies, in entire political parties can shape climate change in a way which fits their own personal narrative and completely miss the point. As you can see, this is Shell's mission statement from one of their old platforms, and you'll see there. But their values, they'll foster goal zero, but their values are no harm to people or the environment. Engage every person, diversity, inclusion, and balance, top quartile producer, no oil left behind. A familiar phrase, an entire organization dedicated to creating an internal narrative which served its interest of being a good global citizen, but nonetheless developing what in the book I explain are called moral license, which allows you to do one thing on one side and one thing on another because you're great in this regard and dangerous in another. So, I will wind up. As you can tell, I spent a lot of my time talking to people I wouldn't normally speak to, which was a great honor, and actually, I just love talking to people, and I'm also fascinated by how people say different things. I urge you all to do this. Just spend time, not even talking, actually listening. I mean, I'm talking a lot now, but I spend a lot of time just listening, just saying, tell me about yourself. This guy, Joel Hunter, is the head of one of the largest megachurches in the US. And I said, Joel, tell us how we could do this better. He said, okay. He gets climate change, by the way, and in a very big way. And he said, okay, he said, I'll tell you how, from my perspective, as an evangelist who's built my church up, I think that you guys could do this better. He says, first of all, he says, we have a community of belief. We come together through shared belief. He says, what you kind of do is you give people a leaflet with a website on it. We bring people in to a community and we hold their hands because they have doubt as well. There's plenty of doubt around climate change, not surprisingly, but you kind of treat people as if they're idiots if they doubt it. You just assume you just give them the information and that's it. He says what we do is when we really believe in something, we go out and we share that. We say, I believe this is important to me. Somehow you feel a little bit embarrassed to do that. And he said, for me personally, I came to climate change through an epiphany. Like, this thing happened and I realized and it changed my life. And in my own church, what we do is we try and make that happen. We do things like altar calls. We go out to people and we say, if you've seen this, if you've heard this, if you believe it, now stand up and come forward. And when you do that, you see that other people are standing up too. And finally, he said, and I think this is really important, he said, and also, we give people, we tell people what they're doing sometimes is wrong, that they have to change the way they live, but we can only do that because we give them forgiveness. He said, and there's no forgiveness in climate change. And you know what, he's right, there's none. There's no forgiveness in climate change. If you go out and Google forgiveness plus climate change, you'll find nothing. There's no discourse of forgiveness around it. And so people are looking and they're going, well, hang on, if I take this on board, you're going to make me feel lousy about my life. You're going to make me feel lousy about the way I've lived. And as soon as I do it, you're telling me that I have the intention to cause harm because I haven't changed the way I've lived. Because from the point where you take a bite out of the apple from the tree of knowledge, of climate knowledge, from that point onwards, you then have the intention to cause harm because you know. So not surprisingly, people keep away. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about climate change being a religion. It is absolutely not a religion. It's based in scientific facts, and a religion is a different thing. It's a powerful, personal, spiritual experience. What I am saying, though, is that Joel is speaking from his own life and from 2,000 years of practical experiment in how do you make people hold a share of views, which, let's face it, can sometimes be uncertain, they can require sacrifice, and they can require stuff in the future. They're difficult to deal with. I think there's a lot to learn here. And I think in particular, there's a lot to learn about how to create news stories. I guess that's what I'm showing. I'm not even saying these are ways of doing it, but news stories around climate change which speak to different values. Like, for example, this guy, he's the president of Conserve America. Conserve America is a Catholic group. And it's very anti-abortion, as you'll see. He gets climate change. And when people who are unusual, they're not like the usual suspects, get climate change, something amazing happens. They turn it into something quite new. I'm not sure I don't feel entirely comfortable with this because, to be honest, I don't share Rob's views on abortion. I don't. But I dare say there may be people in this room who do. That's not the issue. What is interesting here is that when climate change is taken by different people and shaped by different values, it becomes something new. And that's the theme I'd like us to talk about for the rest of this evening, right? How can we take this thing, which is so difficult to deal with, but we know people block out because of the way it gets told, and how can we talk about it and think about it in a new way? And I guess with that, I'd like you, if you may, just for a couple of minutes, and then we'll go into more of a group discussion, but just for a couple of minutes, with the person next to you, think, is there a new way that you could talk about climate change with somebody new? Maybe someone you know who's a bit skeptical, who's a bit in denial, or isn't quite there, maybe they're in the silence. Is there a way that you could talk to them in a new way that speaks differently to their values? Just for a couple of minutes.